Hello, Retro Warhammer fans. Welcome back. Every now and then we get something really special out of the dungeon, so to speak. Today we've got this ancient Slaaneshi Marine, and this model has been giving me like lots of. I've been twisting myself up a little bit about how to paint this model to the best of my ability, simply because it's an odd-looking miniature. It's an original Chaos Renegade with a very clear Slaaneshi bent back from 1988, sculpted by Michael Perry and Kev Adams. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how to do like justice to this really interesting model. And I think what I'm ending up doing is just having a bunch of pastel colors and then kind of trying to figure out how exactly I want to treat this model as I go along. Um, so the color that I'm starting with is Demonette Hide, which is a contrast paint, and it's actually a really kind of, you know, like kind of a pale and kind of understated lilac color, which I thought would be a really good way to sort of build up the different colors. So my plan, if you could call it that, is to start with fairly chill, fairly pastel and fairly light colors to form the basis of the deepest areas of detail, and then after that slowly work my way up to more intense colors until I kind of end up with that sort of perfect mix of bright and sort of uncanny colors that I want this model to be. I think very early on I was thinking about whether I should just go really lurid and bright with this miniature, and I don't think that was the right choice. So I'm sort of dialing it back a little bit in terms of my approach, and starting from something quite muted, and then we'll gradually work our way up to something a little bit more interesting and more intense as time goes by. So the first thing I'm doing is applying this over all of the striations on his armor, her armor, its armor, however you choose to look at this model. And then when that's dry, I will come in and fill in the panels with something a little bit more intense. I'm thinking Sigvald Burgundy, which has that really nice sort of like magenta kind of intensity. And from then on, I can sort of decide what I want to do to all of the sort of supporting areas. I think as far as complementary colors, I want some kind of blue green, some kind of a teal to be the supporting cast of this color scheme. So purple and teal is always a winner. Yeah, so that should work well in combination. So let's go with this all over coat first, and we can decide how we want to intensify it a little bit later. So I'm putting this over all the striations on the armor plates all over its body. Yeah, let's go with it. I think that makes the most sense to me. Now, this model has the most disturbing face possible, and I kind of love it. It's it comes from that era of I think Slaaneshi Marines, like way before the whole Emperor's Children storyline had started. I don't think Fulgrim was a character at this point. I think it was more about various Chaos Marines being lured by the powers of chaos as they kind of made their way crusading around the universe and falling afoul of chaos gods through many means. Just chaos appears to be a less defined concept at this time, but that kind of makes it almost more exciting, right? Because chaos is just weird and unknowable, like unknown sort of like enemy, and that kind of made it more exciting, almost like an enemy within kind of narrative. And I really sort of like that kind of story because I think it keeps the whole sense of mystery going, and that's really compelling for me. So I am putting on this all over its fleshy bits as well as all over the striated rows, and we can decide how we want to intensify this as we go on. Along the way, part of the benefits of using such a gentle color is that I don't really care too much if I sort of over apply it. It takes a lot of this stuff to really make a model look really too dark or too intense, so I'm not too worried about that. You see, the challenge is that some of these striated areas, I can't tell whether I'm over applying or not, simply because it doesn't. The grooves are deep, and they're certainly present on the miniature, but they're not so deep to the point where it looks as if the miniature really uh, would suit a two-tone color scheme or not. Some of these areas, they look like they could be the same material. Um, as far as the original color scheme that was published in 1988 is concerned, this model is just really, really bright and kind of lacks a little bit of the subtlety of later color schemes. Which is not to say that Slaanesh should be subtle. I mean, usually it's quite the opposite. But I like the idea that these miniatures should have some kind of a unified theme to their color scheme, just so that they look internally coherent. Although you could definitely argue that Slaanesh is the exact kind of model where that shouldn't be an issue at all. But your mileage will vary. I just like the way this looks when I apply it, like to a model that's potentially very busy and full of surface detail. Yeah, so just going around the surface, painting over all of this ribbing, and once that's done, I will come in and Sigvald Burgundy the panel recesses, and hopefully that gives me something that is very strong visually, but not overwhelmingly gaudy, because I think I like to stick to the sort of pastel kind of description of a lot of the early Chaos Marines, Slaaneshi Marines specifically. So, still going around, lots of this stuff. And I think what I would do following this stage is to kind of let the hair dry, have a go, make sure everything is fully dry before we come in with the next darker color. There are also these sections that are a little bit indistinct and kind of hard to understand. There's a real Geigerish quality to some of these earlier models, and it's a little bit hard to tell what is a cable and what is an organic component. And I think that's the idea, right? You're supposed to be able to struggle. You're supposed to struggle to tell what is what for these early models, and that's kind of what makes them so compelling, yet so oddly bedeviling to generate a color scheme from. Like these things in the center, at first glance, I thought they would be wires or cables, but the more I look at them, the more I realize that they look a lot more integral to the structure of the piece than initially suspected. And then what is essentially a boob over there doesn't appear to be a boob when I look closely. It kind of looks more like a mutated and distorted breastplate, and the corresponding plate is kind of covered over on the other side of the miniature. So that should be fun to do. He seems to be armed with a power claw, like crab claw, some kind of a claw, and that looks like a traditional bright red might be ideal, since we want to draw lots of attention to that part of the model. So maybe that's what I will do. I don't think this is a special model of any description. This is just a regular renegade chaos marine, or renegade chaos, yeah, chaos marine basically. Chaos renegade, I suppose, would be what they are officially called, from 1988. And yeah, pretty interesting miniature to try to get to grips with. I might actually jump in with some Magos Purple. So my fear is that Sigvald Burgundy might be a little bit too strong, a little bit too intense for what I am trying to achieve, which is essentially a more subtle pastel color scheme. So I might tone down that approach because it might be a little bit too much going on. So let's see how that goes. Okay, I think that's it for now. Let's give this model a little bit of time to dry, and we'll continue from that point. So what you see is the miniature equivalent of me throwing caution to the wind and just going for Sigvald Burgundy on the inside of the armor panels. I tried going down, the Magos purple route, but I kind of found that it was a little bit too strong for the Dreadful Visage. Oh, by the way, it's Dreadful Visage. I got it wrong. I thought it was Demon at High. Demon at High is another color that's not a contrast paint, I think. The contrast paint itself is Demon at... No, it's Dreadful Visage. And it's a great color. I really like it. I think it's very desaturated and very useful in that sense. It's a rare enough color that you get lilac in the Games Workshop range. Because the number of users for it is maybe not the greatest, but it's a beautiful color and it can do great things for your miniatures if you're trying to achieve a more subtle look. So Sigvald Burgundy is the opposite of subtle, right? It's like just this really intense magenta or plum shade. It's definitely darker than a magenta, but it's really intense and pretty. And I think we'll be able to get some kind of almost like a nail polish sort of look if we paint the recesses of these panels in this color. So on the left side, you can sort of see that I've already sort of jumped in to do a test. What I did was multiple panels in different colors, and Sigvald Burgundy was the winner in the end. This is what happens when I get a little bit in my head about the color scheme of choice. And what I found is that Magos Purple ended up being slightly blotchy for some reason on this surface. And I think it's purely because the Magos Purple is not strong enough to really define the interior of the panels. So when selecting contrast paints, what I find is that it's a good idea to pair really strong contrast paints with a lot weaker ones. If you go sort of light on light contrast paint, as in weak contrast paint over weak contrast paints, I find that you get some pretty blotchy results. Weak contrast paints are an example of these would be all the flesh colored ones. So Plague Bearer Flesh. I would consider Aethermatic Blue in that list, and definitely Magos Purple. When these apply over each other, you'll find that they don't cover fully. The level of translucency is very high, so you do get some blotchiness on the surface, which is not ideal, right? And then for the strong ones, you will be looking at things like Aeldari Emerald, like Croxical Scale, all of these colors that have a lot of pigment to them and produce something that's a lot darker and a lot more intense over the surface. So when you mix these up on the surface, you end up with problems, because when you mix up light and light on the surface, you have problems because the light contrast paint ends up being too translucent to achieve any real functional coat over the surface. I think it's starting to look a little bit like Frieza from Dragon Ball, and I kind of like that look. I don't mind the way this is turning out suddenly. Sorry guys, epiphany moment. Sometimes this happens. Kind of cool. Okay. Anyway, so on with filling in the windows. As with doing the ridges, this might take a little while. You've got to sort of take your time to fill these in without getting over all the ribbing. So I hope you will bear with me. I promise it'll be worth where we end up with this color scheme. So I love Noise Marines. I really do. I have a entire, I guess it would it have been 4th edition? I think so. 4th edition Chaos Army. Chaos Noise Marine Force, where it's just nothing but Noise Marines. And it was my first foray into 40k proper, because prior to that I was playing almost exclusively Warhammer Fantasy. Flying Noise Marine. So yeah, Noise Marines are just the idea that they embody, excess in a completely new and I guess non-sexual way was really appealing to me. I like the idea that Slaanesh embodies a lot more than just physical attraction, although I admit that's a very big part of the design process. or the design ethos of Slaanesh, in that they are sort of oddly alluring in a very disturbing sort of way. I get that. I like that sort of material, but I like the idea that there are more legs to the concept than just that base line of reasoning. So in that sense, the whole noise access thing, where they're addicted to loud noises and they're just, sort of broadcasting their presence over the battlefield, just was really compelling conceptually to me, because sonic weapons are just a really rare thing in any sci-fi setting, unfortunately. And to see them embodied in the game, where there was some kind of an element to capture the projection of noise over the surface. So there's great effect when fired at close range, but then the sound kind of diminishes as you get further and further away. That was kind of a really cool concept that I really enjoyed. Unfortunately, Games Workshop appears to have dropped the concept by the wayside and not updated them for a very long time. But if at the point of this video's release, the Eldar are already receiving the updates from 30 years ago, finally replacing things like the warp spiders. So yeah, that should tell you that things are probably on their way eventually. Would be nice. They just haven't gotten around to it yet. And I find there's no rush really. So I would rather have something that's a great release, that is a worthy addition to the pantheon over the years, as opposed to something that looks rushed and kind of crap, which unfortunately has happened a couple of times, although it must be said less often than real winners. Cool. So I am moving over the armor on the forearm now in Sigvald Burgundy. This I can see will really need a lot of cleaning up later, simply because all these fiddly little recesses and windows take a bit of doing, but it's getting there. So sometimes we just got to keep the faith and keep grinding forward. There was a point, I think, in my painting career where something like this might have stopped me entirely from painting, simply because it's so fiddly and so ugh. But I think over time, what I've learned is that I just need to sometimes just trust the process and to keep grinding on, with the hope that we get something worthwhile at the end of the day. That's always the problem with Chaos, right? Like they've got this thing about adding all this insane trim, which I admit looks great, right? No question about it. The trim is a unique feature that I'd rather see retained than dropped. But there's a lot to the way trim is sculpted that can make it a lot more of a monster to paint, a lot more unpleasant if you're not careful. And that's about clarity and depth, right? Because if the trim isn't properly deep and defined, it can come across as shallow, and paint doesn't settle into it properly. Whereas, there is such a thing as the correct kind of edge geometry, or the kind of trim geometry, I guess, that can make something a lot easier to paint. And I think that's kind of key. If you let models, be covered in lots of trim that's kind of ill-defined and fairly shallow, you're going to end up with a model that just takes too long to paint, frankly, because a lot of the areas, a lot of your time is going to be spent cleaning up and touching up, and that's kind of nobody's favorite thing to do, right? Nobody's favorite part of the process is cleaning up and touching up a miniature. So, yeah, I think that in that sense, some Chaos models kind of struggle a little bit, because the in an effort to try sort of make the model too detailed, sometimes the designers go a little bit overboard with things like trim, and you end up with a model that is just crawling with shallow detail, and that doesn't paint, or at least the painting experience is kind of lost a little bit, because it's a lot less fun to paint a model that just is full of things that you need to touch up. So that's not great. So with that in mind, I've always been a fan of them kind of like not overdoing the trim, kind of putting it only where it's meaningful to put it. But it seems like with later releases, the need to sort of make models ever more detailed and complicated just kind of hit a new level, and it became very difficult to just enjoy painting those models for what they are. Every chaos miniature kind of turns into a little bit of an ordeal, and that's not great, right? So yeah, but of course your mileage will vary. If you enjoy those models, more power to you. I'm always glad to see people do like amazing takes on very, very detailed models. It's just sometimes it's not the most fun thing in the world for me to paint. I kind of That's why I kind of like focus my niche on like earlier models, because I feel like they're a lot more judicious with the layer of detail, and I kind of like the way they don't sort of overdo things meaninglessly. Like this guy, for example, there's just so much going on in this miniature, but it's fairly well organized. Some of the detail for the trim, like I mentioned, could be a lot more deep and well defined, but for the most part, this model kind of achieves the goal of spreading that detail over the surface in meaningful ways. So yeah, love this model. It's coming along nicely as well, in my opinion. Although I am running out of Sigvald Burgundy on my palette. The challenge with Sigvald Burgundy really is that it's so strong, right? It goes on like a ton of bricks, and it kind of obliterates anything underneath it. So there is a need to sort of try to make sure that, yeah, like that, I don't accidentally get it everywhere that I don't want it to be. So some of these bits will definitely need to be touched up. But that's how it is, especially with Chaos models. Okay, cool. Moving on with more Sigvald Burgundy. At this point, I'm kind of dying to do another color. It's anywhere on the miniature. But you gotta keep the faith. Gotta keep rolling on the color. And gotta remember to come back to touch up the areas that have gotten color on them that are not intended. And we'll be fine eventually. Yep. Let's get some of the spaces between these funny horn-like projections. And maybe we should just do the horn projections. Yeah. I'm always at a quandary when it comes to these like surface details, like how much is enough. How much of a protuberance, I guess, is enough to justify it being a separate material, or a separate color rather, and how much of it is just whatever, I'll pick it up, that's just a highlight. It's always a fine line, and I do find that a big part of my decision making process is just how much time I intend to spend on a miniature in general. Like for example, the Necron Warrior, which you guys seem to like, which is wonderful. But yeah, I really found that model just crawling with too much extraneous detail. To the point where I was struggling to decide what color should be what, and in the end, I just sort of all did it in black, which I think did the color scheme no end of value, because it ended up being a lot more subtle and a lot more creepy and monochromatic, which I kind of thought worked with the theme of the miniature. At least of a Necron Raider, because it was this unknown element. It was this shadowy and dark and slightly intimidating threat, as opposed to something that's just nice and bright and well understood. Like Necrons have gotten really bright over time, to the point where now everything is kind of like neon green, and there are bits of black on the surface of the model, but really they're just there to make the neon green pop even more. And sometimes that's fine. That's fine. That's kind of an approach, I suppose. But it also kind of takes away a little bit of the mystery of it. And thematically, if Necrons are supposed to be a mystery, which I know they aren't anymore, Necrons are just a race like any other race. um, on account of the sort of lore revision that sort of made them a lot more human. Then yeah, a brighter, more knowable color scheme or catalog of color schemes um, is a better bet, I suppose. But I do still really enjoy the shadowy unknown of the original color schemes when they were launched back in White Dwarf 2015, 2017. I remember, a long time ago. Yeah. Anyway, cool. I think we are finally done with the Sigvald Burgundy. I'm coming in now with a little bit of silver grey to try to clean up some of the edges. And after this, I will treat myself with moving on to another color because I am quite done with Burgundy at this stage. We probably will still come back to do a highlight every now and then. But for now, I think we're good. A bit of redefining of that trim and our Dragon Ball looking guy. Our Frieza guy is looking better. So claw. Okay. Cool. I am going to jump in with a bit of Aethermatic Blue for the eyes. And these limpid pools of liquefied ether. Kind of great. Kind of creepy looking. Yeah. All I really needed was another color on the surface to reconnect me with my desire to live. So we move on to red on the claw, as promised earlier. Something about red on demonette claws for this era is just iconic. I think they just fit the bill. They just look the part once you do it. And I guess maybe it's in line with our understanding of these as sort of crabby looking bits. We understand that that's what a lobster claw looks like, but really it's what happens when you cook a lobster claw. So have a bit of a think about that, I suppose, and what it bodes for the well-being of this particular marine. But he's fine; he'll get by. He's got a positive attitude. A little bit of red around the edges. And this sort of area over here is a really interesting example of what happens when you need to cast a model as one piece. Not as one piece, but as a single piece. Insofar as his claw is melding into his leg. Okay, so let's move on. Horns. And lots of weird cables. Wow, what to do next? Okay, I want to touch up some areas really badly because I think I got I got Sigvald Burgundy kind of everywhere. It's amazing how much better I feel now that the Burgundy is down. Even if it's not perfect. Yep. Lots of little lines on the surface. They drive you mad if you're not careful. Whew. Okay. Let's move on to his gun then. So a bit of silver from Vallejo. Just keep his gun fairly muted for now. Ooh. Do I want to do that bit in Sigvald Burgundy? No, probably not. I think I've done enough of that. Thank you very much. So let's just do the muzzle. And and back of the muzzle. And the magazine. And then I think a lot of the gun is going to have to be something dark and nondescript, because it's not really the focus of the miniature. That crazy looking claw, I think, and its weird wormy face, wormulon face, I think have to be the focus of the miniature. Okay, cool. I'm gonna hit him with a hairdryer. Be right back. Okay, the march on weirdness continues. So let's move on with a bit of Aeldari Emerald for these hose bits. So this is the case of, this is how we use teal to try to counterbalance the strength of the magenta. In the case of the Sigvald Burgundy, it is really, really strong. So sometimes you really need something equally strong to kind of balance that off and kind of create visual contrast to prevent that model essentially taking the whole, that color taking the whole model over. So we're going to put a little bit of this over the eyes as well. It's creepy little jewel-like eyes. And we'll be putting a specular highlight in the top right-hand corner in a bit. And onto the back as well. These vents. Kind of cool how weird these details are in this miniature, because a lot of this stuff is really techno arcane looking, right? Like there is the tech of the original Marine, and then after that the kind of tech layer just overlays that, or rather the arcane layer sort of just overlays that and just makes it look really something unique and kind of special. And even this early in the process, I think it's really interesting to see that they've got some of the fundamentals of the Chaos Marine look down already, showing that nostalgia and iteration have always been forces in the Games Workshop machine. Maybe you know, when they finally redo like Noise Marines, they'll reference these early models. One can only hope, because these guys are pretty special. I feel like they're quite unique, and yes, they're weird, but they're good weird in my opinion. I really like the sort of worm blob head, and with the sort of limpid pools of emerald for eyes, and just how strange and uncanny the whole ensemble looks. So a bit of Black Templar for the gun casing, at least. I think this is where we want to re-establish a little bit of the tech side of the equation. Not everything should be overrun with Arcana, so that we've got that mix of tech and the arcane to try to sort of reinforce the look of essentially once human soldiers taken over by an eldritch being. I think just the idea of how upsetting this creature would be to encounter, like on a ship or in orbit, makes this model an absolute winner for me. It's definitely got the creep factor, right? Like in a like, I think our eyes are designed to kind of pick out patterns that resemble human faces, and we abhor asymmetry. We abhor anything that looks out of place. And in that sense, this model, its just overall appearance is absolutely horrifying. Would not mess with. would make a beeline back for my dropship if I saw one of these guys coming towards me. And I think that's fairly universal. The creep factor is definitely high with these models. So, with the interest of like keeping this thing like uncanny valley enough, I think I decided to go with a different color for the horns instead of something that's traditionally readable as biological horns. I would prefer to go for something dark and weird and something less organic, almost like tentacles growing out of the top of the head. So black was my color of choice because I think it kind of works well with the really bright and vivid sections of color already on the model. A little bit more Aeldari Emerald for some of these under sections, and nondescript cables that plug in and out of the armor seemingly at random under these weird grill archways. And over on this side as well. Kind of feel like some of these under areas are a little bit undefined, but the body horror of it is definitely in full swing. Yep, they go right around the back and plug into the backpack quite nicely. Okay, we're moving along. Okay, so while off camera, I was touching up some of the claw areas because a little bit of the white got away from me. So what I've done is I've come back with a second layer of our red mix, which is of course our blood red plus Gryph Hound orange mix. And I've kind of put it over these bumps as well because I kind of like how they extend that crustacean look, like halfway up the arm, which appears for all intents and purposes to be exposed skin. Yeah. So, kind of want to put a little bit here as well in the recesses, so it looks like it's like this mutation is kind of crawling up the hand in a very upsetting way. And then after that, we'll come back with a bit of Phalanx yellow mixed into that red to get a nice orange highlight and apply it towards the end of the claw. And along the business end of this claw plate. And go a little bit on the back as well. And along the edge of this, I suppose, chitinous panel, and on these little bumps, which I imagine are bits where new claw plates are spreading over the surface. New panels of chitinous armor are spreading all over that arm. Horrible. Gonna grab a bit of Vallejo Silver Grey and give it that specular highlight that we were talking about. Just nice and small. The one on the right could stand to be a bit smaller. So we'll let that dry, we'll come back and fix it. Okay, so let's drop a little bit of silver grey into the Black Templar, and let's apply a bit of a highlight over the gun. or at least over the casing parts of the gun. It's a simple kind of grey. It's not a lot to the gun really, just a bit of a ridge. But definitely a bit more organic looking than your average Imperial gun, from which it's clearly derived because it still retains all the basic parts. And then let's do sort of a bit of a line highlight for this horn. And more again for this side. Keep it nice and subtle. And then the tongue, which I think we found a home for our Magus Purple. It's just the right shade of off-putting pink. Kind of great, really. There we go, nice and knobbly and weird. Okay, now let's move on to detailing some of the Sigvald Burgundy bits, because it's a little bit dark and unreadable at some places now. So a little bit of silver grey. I think that could be a little bit stronger. Put a bit of a highlight into the center of each of these panels, with an emphasis towards the top. And the panel should come alive for us. There are perfume bottles that you can get in Middle Eastern countries that kind of look like this. I got some specifically in Egypt. But yeah, those tropes, you know, slightly bulbous, slightly sinuous and curved, but very, very glossy and pretty. Kind of what I was thinking of when I was looking at these armor panels, almost like a perfume bottle or a hookah. So each of these panels gets its own little highlight and becomes almost like a little gem in and of itself. And this highlight goes over horns and bumps and all these nondescript, slightly organic shapes all over the surface of the model. Geiger would be proud at what his work would go on to inspire, I would imagine. Assuming he was a fan of this stuff, that is. But he would have been proud to know that it went on to inspire all these little nerds and that his famed aesthetic would go a long way towards inspiring further art of that, at least, I'm sure. Because there's nothing better for an artist than to know that your work goes on to inspire further art and creativity. I hope. Yeah, once you sort of draw attention to all these individual panels, it kind of starts to get really nice looking. Like really unique and really like pretty in a weird way. And I think that's what we've been gunning for this whole time, because this is a Slaanesh model. And it is supposed to be uncannily attractive looking, as well as being undeniably weird. As of course we are all reminded by the juxtaposition of his horrible face. But yeah, this color I'm beginning to like more and more. Oh god, every time I catch sight of his face, I'm like, ooh. Yeah, it's just weird enough. And it's kind of all the worse now that it's in color. Because I was like wondering about how whether it would paint up nicely or not. I see that it has painted up very nicely. Too nicely, in fact. This whole Wormulon look. Is it the worms from like Men in Black that I'm thinking of? Wormulon? That must be where it's from. It's just weird enough that it kind of brings out those vibes, and I kind of love it. Okay, so the highlights proceed apace with Sigvald Burgundy. Find that adding a little bit of desaturated purple kind of goes a long way towards lightening it up in a way that doesn't come across as too over the top. That desaturated gray is of course my favorite, silver gray, which is nice and bright without being like just insanely gaudy when mixed with Sigvald Burgundy. There we go. Now, one last highlight, I promise. And this is really just to reassert the very brightest points. It's easy to get carried away with highlighting when it's going well. But as with all things, we find that there must be a stopping point to prevent us completely flying off the handle. It's weird carapace plates which are splitting open at his back. Pretty horrifying. Boot plate. Which I see I've gotten a little bit of green on. I think I need to fix that. So far, I'm happy to see that I've managed to avoid gold on this miniature. I think gold is one of those colors that kind of symbolizes traditional opulence, but I've kind of managed to avoid using it on this miniature, and I'm kind of glad that's the case because I like the idea that gold is a bit of a. I feel like gold is a bit of a crutch when you want to make something look expensive or precious or anything like that. And this miniature, although it would inspire feelings of wanting to own or cherish or to overpower all of our base and carnal urges, I suppose. It would inspire in a twisted sort of way in onlookers. I'm kind of glad we've managed to steer clear of what is, I guess, almost a caricature of desire, which is the color gold. And if you can do a Slaanesh model without using that color, I always feel it's almost a bit of a cool, bit of a triumph. Because if you're going to be doing models belonging to the entire pantheon, as I am, you kind of want to save the bronze or the sort of russet gold color for other miniatures because I think they justify it more. The Slaanesh models, I think, are weird and disturbing enough to not need something like that. In my opinion. Ooh, I missed an entire foot. Okay. Must have been beguiled by the rest of the model. Cue guile theme. So yeah. over the foot that we missed. It's a perfect time to sort of trim back some of the more egregious highlights, more exuberant highlights that I put on. Very in keeping with Slaanesh excess. A bit more on that foot, a bit more on the inside of the foot, and we're good. Perfect. Now, just a bit of Nuln Oil. Or should we do something different for the metal? Let's try a bit of Deadly Visage again. So try to give it a little bit of an interesting tint rather than our traditional Nuln Oil, which, to be fair, we have plenty of black in the form of the casing. Yeah, there we go. I think that's interesting. Now I wanted to trim down that eye glint. That kind of works. Yeah. I think that's looking okay. Let's let that dry fully and come back to it. So a little bit more Phalanx yellow into the red to really push the madness of this claw. At this point, it's almost a bright, fiery orange. That's kind of what we're looking for. And I think our wormy friend is just about ready to go to war. It's a little bit of a highlight. These cables. And a series of spots in silver grey, just to reinforce the look of the horns, and a little bit more Magos purple for the tongue. Now the teeth, because this thing has teeth. Let's do that in black first. Teeth indeed. A bit of black around the tongue helps to separate it. Very licky tongue. Okay, I'm gonna need to dry this off. Okay, let's just finish off this guy and his weird teeth. It's a fine brush and a bit of silver grey. I can't help but feel that the tongue doesn't stand out. Just weird. Okay, so let's drop a little bit of flesh mix on it, just to make it a little bit more organic looking. I consider grey as well, but I think that's green as well, but I think that's a bit too much. Let's just keep it fleshy and weird. And nothing says fleshy and weird than a little bit of fleshy pink. Yeah. Bit of a head dry again. Bit of a highlight. You can see that a bit of pure white is needed for the teeth, just to make them pop. Okay, and I think we're good. One Chaos Renegade of Slaanesh. Creepy and snippy and clawy. All the things you want from a Chaos miniature of that ilk. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed watching this. Just as much as I enjoyed painting him. There are a lot more models of this type that I want to do. One each of the Chaos Gods at least. I hope you join me for those. Have a good one. Cheers. Bye-bye.